Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Something in the Wild podcast. I'm Tyler Smith, as always. And today, I want to talk with you a little bit about my week, what I ended up doing this weekend, and also the history of the whitetail deer here in Pennsylvania. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is because this upcoming weekend, is the opening weekend of rifle deer season. Pretty much a state holiday. A lot of schools will get, whenever the opener was on Mondays, a lot of schools would get that Monday off. I was never so lucky, but I know a lot of my friends definitely got that day off, and very, very jealous because of it. But it's kind of an interesting story, and the reason that I kind of thought about doing this today is because I spent my weekend up in north central Pennsylvania with my one buddy. We were doing some bear hunting, and didn't end up getting one, unfortunately, but spent some time up there just kind of soaking in the area. We were sitting on some really awesome vistas overlooking some really cool country. And so I'm going to talk about the history of the whitetail deer here in Pennsylvania. But first, I want to talk about my weekend a little bit. And like I said, my weekend was absolutely freaking awesome. Spent some time with my buddy Matt. We were doing some bear hunting, like I just said, with some of his family. And what they do whenever they're bear hunting and they're deer hunting is they like to do some long-range hunting. Now, this is very, very foreign to me. Never before have, I guess, partook in that sort of hunting. And really for good reason too. I don't really have that sort of opportunity. I mean, it takes some very specialized equipment to do that sort of hunting. You need a very special rifle. You need very finely tuned bullets, and you need very accurate, very high definition spotting scopes, very accurate range finders, and also these calculation things that take into account wind direction, wind speed, what direction the wind's coming from, and all this stuff, put it into equation and give you your adjustments for a very specialized scope on that rifle. So there's a lot that goes into it, and it was really cool. I actually ended up getting to shoot the gun at 1,100 yards, a little bit over 1,100 yards, aiming for this one MOA-sized rock that was 1,100 yards away, and ended up just barely missing it, but it was close, and I was pretty proud myself. First time shooting that gun, first time shooting that sort of that long of a distance, and so it was pretty cool. But what was really, really intriguing to me was just looking over this land and kind of talking with Matt about what has gone on in that area before, and that'll kind of bring me into the whitetail deer discussion here. But what the biggest thing that I kind of took away was all of those forests up there, all the state forests, and if you haven't been to Pennsylvania, that's fine. I would definitely recommend checking it out though at some point. But you go into these forests in north central Pennsylvania, it's all woods. There's no fields like there is out west. There's nothing. If you're going in these state forests, these huge tracts of state forest, it's all woods. Just millions and millions of trees. And the crazy thing about that is that all of those trees were cut down at one point. All of the timber was harvested at some point, and there were people that had to do that. Granted, this was a long time ago, before these state forests were public ground, before public land was really even a thing. Back in the early 1800s, and into the early 1900s a little bit as well. But just the sheer mass of these these forests, like the amount of wood that could be harvested, absolutely crazy. So I want to talk real quick first about, just kind of where wildlife was at that point whenever that logging did start to take place, and where things went, how we got to the point we are today, and I'll get right into that right now. So first things first, whitetail deer and other wildlife, there was like 30-some million whitetail deer in the United States before European settlement. And it might not sound like super impressive, but you got to also remember that whitetail deer were native to the eastern side of the United States. There were no whitetail deer really out west. It was a lot of mule deer, blacktail, and elk, and bison, obviously. So indigenous really to the eastern half of the United States, and there were 30-some million deer on the eastern half of the United States. Well, Europeans come in around the 1600s, and the early settlers of Pennsylvania would explain wildlife as being like so plentiful. There'd be massive, massive herds of these deer. There's accounts of Daniel Boone whenever he would go out on these long hunts and run into herds of hundreds of deer and, hundreds of elk in the eastern part of the United States, because, Pennsylvania and a lot of the East had elk. Not only did they have elk, though, okay, not only did they have elk and whitetail, which we have elk and whitetail now, but not only that, they had moose. There were wolves running around out here. There were mountain lions running around out here. More plentiful. There are arguments made that there are still mountain lions here. I've yet to see one. They're very secretive, but people say that they are here. Who am I to say that they're not, right? I think everything could be true until proven not true, or I guess that's kind of against the premise of the justice system. But anyway, I have no reason to believe that there aren't some mountain lions here in this area. But back then, man, there was just deer everywhere, and people were exploring, right? People kind of settled in the Philadelphia area, New York. There's a lot of people over there that were settling, and they wanted to move west. And this was like the onset of the Western movement, where people were moving out west, building homesteads, trying to provide a better life for their family, because there was so much resource, there was so much stuff out west, in the western part of the state, western part of the country. There were just resources out there that you could go and you could go harvest and you could utilize them. A lot of that had to deal with deer and elk and moose, and that's what people did, is they moved west and they hunted. And I read this book a while back, and I continually forget what it was actually called, but I can definitely look it up here real quick. But essentially, this book talked about the early life of this one settler of Pennsylvania, where he moved west. Philip Toome, and he wrote a journal about his experiences with elk and mountain lions in Pennsylvania, and specifically in northern Pennsylvania. I mean, I was real close to where he homesteaded and where his land was. And basically what he did was he would follow the rivers west, and up into central Pennsylvania, where there was a bunch of mountains and a bunch of wildlife, and he just kind of stake his claim up there. Very, very cool stuff. But basically what happened during that era is everyone was trying to do that. There was no sort of regulated hunting or anything like that. And there was a lot of habitat loss, because these people were trying to supply wood, trying to supply resources for the booming population in the United States. And how they do that: killed deer for meat, killed elk for meat, killed elk for hides, killed deer for hides, and cut down a bunch of trees. And there were a lot of unregulated, unsustainable practices going on around this time. This is like around the 1800s, just about. And, some of that, some of those sort of unsustainable practices were like using bait piles, using, jacklighting, which is basically like hunting deer at night, and hunting them based on the glow in their eyes. And this really took a toll on the population. Back in 1883, deer were nearly extinct in Pennsylvania, which is crazy because of how many there were. But this near extinction kind of sparked what conservationists now, like, this was kind of like the birth of conservation, the birth of the thought of conservation. We did so much destruction to these populations just because, out of necessity. I mean, these people were starving. They didn't have a lot of food. The only food that they could harvest were from deer and from elk and from other game animals. That was the only meat, the only food that they had. I mean, they could grow vegetables and stuff, and they could have cattle, but in these areas there wasn't really a lot of space for cattle. So they really did a hurting on the deer population. But these conservation efforts kind of rolled around, and in the 1895, the Pennsylvania established the PA Game Commission. Now, a lot of people were very, very hesitant for this, but it had to be done because there were only around 300,000 deer left in the United States. Down from 30 million to only around 300,000 is really, really crazy. And if it didn't happen then, deer might not be here today. The whitetail deer that we know and love today might not be here. So it was all really thanks to Pennsylvania and their foresight, establishing the Game Commission and making sure that the population could thrive for generations to come. Now, what happened then and what the Game Commission did was they initiated these programs. So from 1906 to 1925, Pennsylvania was importing deer to repopulate the state. Like I said, there were so few deer that they were bringing deer in from other areas. And Pennsylvania is also a huge logging area, a huge mining area. A lot of people were mining, a lot of people were logging. And these logging areas actually created phenomenal deer habitat. New growth forests and wildfires created new growth forests as well, where there was a lot of underbrush, high stem count, a lot of food for these deer, and it really, really helped the population. And by 1920, deer harvest had increased dramatically. I mean, they were still hunting deer. There were still seasons the Game Commission instilled seasons to hunt deer, but the deer harvest increased to $3,300 harvested in 1920. So that's pretty substantial, and this basically means that the population's growing. So and sometimes, it's a great thing that populations grow and stuff like that, but sometimes they get to a point where it exceeds what the forest can actually handle, and then it creates more destruction, disease, and things like that. So there had to be something that happened. We were being so successful at bringing back the population that we kind of went a little bit too far, kind of like what we're doing now with turkeys, or what we have done in the past like 20, 30 years or so. Turkey populations were so high, and now they're declining. And that's partially due to just the carrying capacity of the woods. It happens. I mean, this is all part, and like, it's a very fine balance between what the right populations are. And that's why the Game Commission is in place, because they needed to understand and make science-based decisions to regulate that population and make sure that it was healthy, make sure these deer were healthy on an individual level as well as a population-based level. And attempts to control the population were, one of the ideas was antlerless deer hunting seasons. And a lot of people were very, very opposed to this. And people still kind of are opposed to this. It's a very cultural thing where a lot of people are like, well, yeah, you can kill bucks, but no does. And I know a lot of people that are like that. It's, nothing against them. I mean, it's their own personal choice, but this stuff's very important to, take an even number of both does and bucks in some areas. Some other areas don't need does taken. Like, for example, the area that I was at has a very low number of antlerless deer tags available. Now, if for anyone unfamiliar with the antlerless deer license sale in Pennsylvania, basically what happens is the Game Commission puts a quota for the number of does that you can harvest for each unit. And there are probably maybe 30 some wildlife management units in Pennsylvania. And each unit has a specific number of doe tags that they can sell. And they sell out every year. But there's a lot of doe licenses available in Pennsylvania. And that's how we manage the population. That's just what happens. And also it's great because it provides meat for families and stuff like that. So essentially what happens is the Game Commission, they gradually implement science-based management strategies and practices and stuff like that to help manage this population. And it was a great success. This is kind of what happens, boom and bust of certain resources, and specifically happens with deer and happens also with our wood harvest too, whenever there was a lot of large-scale logging operations. Now, granted, clear-cutting some areas was good. It was good for populations, but there were also eras in Pennsylvania where they would clear-cut entire forests, and that was not good for any sort of population because it just ruined habitat and all of those resources were gone out of the woods. So this is very much a cautionary tale, if anything, because once you get away from science-based management, once you get away from adding cultural and monetary value to whitetail deer, to hunting, and all of this stuff, then populations are going to suffer. It's our duty, really, as hunters, as conservationists, to understand what got us to this point in terms of just the history of the animals that we're pursuing, the history of, why are there deer here now, and what was the population like maybe 100 years ago or 200 years ago, and what's our trajectory moving forward. And I think the trajectory is a very big thing. Very, very big thing, I want to talk about this a little bit soon as well, and that is black bears in Pennsylvania and specifically across the United States. Black bears are a great story of conservation success, much like the whitetail deer, much like the turkey. I mean, all of these species, great conservation success stories because they were the populations were so low at some point, and now they're thriving. I mean, turkeys, yes, okay, it's going down slightly, but that doesn't mean that it might not turn around here soon because we have these specific seasons in place. We can make adjustments accordingly and really hone in those hunting seasons. Same thing with deer. deer are it's like the golden age for whitetail deer hunting. I mean, there's massive deer everywhere in every single state that you go to. There's a lot of deer, so that is a really good success story. Same with elk. They were like basically wiped out, and now you can go pick up a tag and go elk hunting. A lot of people don't understand that there's a lot of elk licenses that are very much within reason for people to go pick up. Yeah, they might be a little bit expensive, but that's just the price of what it takes to care for an animal that size and to raise that sort of money to take care of it. So it's very, very important to understand. Very important to understand that managing things is very, very much vital to the health of the population. That comes from hunting. And that's why hunters were so upset with the proposition there in Colorado to ban science-based wildlife management of mountain lions. Huge negative. But I'm glad that it was shot down, and I'm glad that we have these agencies in place, the Game Commission, the Fish and Boat, the DNR for various other states. They take care of our resources, and I think that it's our job as, I guess, users of those resources to understand what's going on. Not just partake in the activities, but understand and get involved in the decision-making process. Very, very crucial for the future of our wildlife, for the future of public land. So that is my 2 cents on the subject, and I think you guys should really care for this sort of stuff as well. I appreciate you guys so much for listening. If you want me to do more stuff like this, diving into the history of certain species or talking about specific things that happened in history, I'd be more than happy to do that. I love this sort of stuff. I love doing the research and looking into, all the numbers and the analytics and the data to kind of figure out what I want to talk about and what I even think about the subject. Some of this stuff I don't really know much about. Like, for example, black bear populations. I'm not, 100% sure about where black bears were at. I know that they were almost wiped out, much like every other big game species in North America. But now they're thriving. So just understanding that stuff's huge. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Really appreciate it. And this week, I hope everyone here in Pennsylvania is going to have a lot of luck this year. Hopefully you guys back your buck. Hopefully you get out there, enjoy spending time with family, with friends, going up to deer camp, all that stuff. It's an awesome time of year, guys. So be sure you get out there, be sure you enjoy it, and make sure to keep it wild.